Chinese story is pretty simple.
And it had to do with visiting a lab in China and looking at an object and enmeshing myself with the object and then coming back and drawing a picture of what I saw. And what I did is I drew the picture, and it was a detailed drawing of trigger mechanism for a nuclear weapon. And everybody kind of laughed about it because I'm not a physicist or anything, so I'm not supposed to know anything about all that stuff. And they sent it forward. They sent it to the DOE, and the DOE reviewed it and everything. And they showed up about 3 days later, some people, and collected all the notes and the drawings and the drafts and all the tapes and materials, and asked me what, who I talked to and where I got all the information, and where I got my engineering degree. And I said, I don't know anything about this stuff. And they said, well, obviously you talked to somebody because this will probably work. And I said, well, I didn't talk to anybody. I don't know anything about what I drew. And they said, well, you used different words, but you talked to somebody. And I said, no, I didn't. But when I do remote viewings, I do learn something about what I remote view. And they said, well, we don't think it works that way. And I said, well, it does. In fact, I don't really need to redraw what I just did. What I could do is do it again, and what I'll do is I'll draw my idea of the way it should work. And so I redrew it. What I did is I went into town and I went to a Radio Shack and I went shopping. And I drew it using parts from a Radio Shack and a bunch of things that I found in Radio Shack and some other ideas, and emulated what I had seen in China, and sketched it out and sent it to the DOE. And they came in about 5 days later and they collected all the notes and everything and said, you really shouldn't talk about this to anybody. That's the story about the Chinese stuff. One of the interesting things, Hal was talking about the CIA not believing some of this stuff. We used to, when we first started doing the targeting for the CIA, we were doing actually coordinate targeting. That was the first way we actually targeted things, and that was coordinates to the second. And everybody knows coordinates to the second is probably 1,000 by 1,000 meters on the ground, which isn't very accurate. So intent has more to do with the targeting than anything, because in 1,000 by 1,000 meters, you could have 18 buildings and a whole lot of things on the ground. So if your interest is in a vehicle sitting on the ground or that submarine, there could be a whole lot of other things that you're interested in that 1,000 by 1,000 meters. So one of the first things they became disturbed about was our accuracy was so good, they started accusing us of having eidetic memories, which means that we had unconsciously memorized the entire planet in the coordinate system for everything on it. And we tried to explain to them, no, one little tiny shed sitting on the ground in the corner of that 1,000 by 1,000 meters, I don't think so. And especially when it's in, up on the White Sea, on the Arctic Circle. But they didn't believe it. So we said, well, okay, just put the coordinates in a sealed envelope and never show them to us. And so they did that. And then one day the agent showed up and he was talking to our operations person, and he said, I really screwed up. I left the coordinates on my desk. And he said, well, okay, write on a piece of paper, target the coordinates I left on my desk. So he put that in the envelope, and we did just as well. And that really upset him. And then one day he came in and he said, I forgot to do the coordinates. And he said, okay, write down The coordinates I forgot to do and put that in the envelope. And that worked just as well. And we never heard him complain about anything. That's the story I'll leave you with.
Would you all like to ask a couple of questions, or do you want to go home? Some funny questions. So I'll come up and maybe you can answer a few questions. Let's start right down here. I'll repeat the question.
Great to hear you. However, in the AIR 1995 study, I think they said that no actionable items were ever produced by you all.
This question was in an AIR study, the one I mentioned on one of the graphs, American Institutes of Research. They said that no actionable items, in other words, actual use, had ever come out of it. There are reasons for that, the main reason being that they weren't cleared to see the really good stuff. And so if you go back and look at the history of the description of the interaction with that committee in the Journal of Scientific Exploration, you'll see that that's where the problem lay. They, the people who came to that conclusion didn't have the code word access, because the people who had the really good data weren't about to spread it out. So that's really the reason for that.
Have you ever acted as the
Not act as a viewer. Yeah, she asked if I acted as the viewer, and how did I do? When we agreed to do the program, the very first rule that we were given was, you must never, ever, ever be a subject in these kind of experiments. And since we knew we might be polygraphed, we couldn't even cheat and try it. They said, we learned our lesson in the LSD research days that the experimenter should not get involved as a subject in this experimentation, or he's going to lose all objectivity. So we just made that an absolute rule.
What's your best assessment of how this works?
He asked, what's my best assessment of how this works? I'd say my best assessment is I don't have a clue. My second best assessment, you can begin to match some of the data best if you consider multidimensional additional dimensions. I mean, you can almost come up with various things to handle this, that, and the other thing, but the future viewing really throws a monkey wrench into all of our present theories. But there are some models where if you have access to additional dimensions, sort of like you rise up out of space-time and you can look ahead and look behind, that maybe you could get from here to there. Quantum entanglement is another aspect where we already know in the laboratory that you can get quantum entanglement, essentially do something to an experiment over here and you see a result over here that's correlated, and there wasn't time for a signal to propagate from here to there. But nonetheless, those are just sort of speculations because we're still so far. So all of our effort at trying to find out how this could possibly work was to tick off every idea we could come up with, frankly. And in a way, I mean, we shouldn't be surprised. If you look into any cosmology articles these days, you'll see that 70+% of what's in the universe is dark energy. We don't have a clue. 20-some% of the universe is dark matter. No idea what it is. What we know about the universe, what physicists and cosmologists know about the universe, is 4%. So there's clearly so much open space out there. So presumably out there somewhere, the truth is out there. But another question?